Here we're going to tie Egan's headstand. This is a great stillwater and river carp fly. First thing that we're going to do is we're just going to tie in some Beadchain eyes right at the front of the hook. We're just going to put a figure X, figure 8 in place to hold these bead chains. And make sure I do quite a few here just to make sure it's secure. Once you've done that, we're going to take our thread all the way down the bend. We're going to take some fox hair. We're going to trim a clump of fox hair out. What I like to do is remove most of the nice long guard hairs too, just by pulling those out. Really, we're only interested in the fluffy stuff, and we want this tail to be about the length of the straight portion of the shank of the hook. So I just roughly measure that out. I'm going to tie this in. I'm going to creep down the bend of the hook here just a little bit. I'm going to take my thread forward. And I could trim out the excess. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take some copper wire. I'm going to pull off a portion about 4 or 5 inches or so. We're going to tie this copper wire in right on the side of the hook, and then we're going to take that all the way back to the tail as well. Now what we need to do is dub the body. I'm just going to use a rust or a brown color dubbing. Any type of basic dubbing will work. This is just some hairline dubbing. Fairly easy to work with. We're just going to build up a nice tapered body. Just going to work it forward. All I'm trying to do is just build up a gradual taper. Now what we're going to do is we're going to leave a little bit of space right behind the bead there. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a brown hackle feather. I'm going to tie this hackle feather in. I'm going to take my hackle pliers here. I'm just going to wrap this hackle back towards the tail. Spacing it out just a little bit here. Once I get to the back, I'm going to take my copper wire and I'm going to counter wrap or wrap through that hackle. And I can capture it. And I'll simply just spiral the wire out of there. Then you could trim out the extra piece of the hackle at the rear. And I'll just kind of stroke all these back, try to force all the fibers rearward. If you trap a few, you can just trim those out of there. Next thing to do is add rubber legs. I'm just going to use a barred crazy leg, pumpkin color. All I'm going to do is tie this in on each side. I do this kind of one at a time here. I'll tie one side in. I'll force the leg to the other side and do the same thing. Once you have those legs in, you're going to trim these about the length of the body, just a hair longer. I'm going to take it all, actually all the way back to halfway back to the tail. There we go. Now the next thing to do is to add the collar. For this we're just going to use some Peacock sword fibers. You'll need about 6 or so of these. We want these to be about 3/4 of the length of the body, and we're just going to tie these in right on the bottom. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert my fly here. It'll make it just a little easier on me. Once you have those tied in, you can get in here and trim out the excess. Flip your fly back up. There we go. Now we're ready for the head. I'm just going to use some synthetic orange dubbing. I'm just going to use an STS Trilobal dubbing. You don't necessarily have to use Trilobal. You can use ice dubbing or Antron dubbing. Just want something with a little bit of shine to it. Dub a nice tight head on this fly. You don't want it to be too shaggy. And just add a little bit of dubbing at a time. It's best to put it in with small amounts rather than clumping one big gnarly clump on. We're going to work this dubbing around the head. We're just trying to build up a ball of dubbing at the head. Nice round ball. And it takes a little bit of dubbing and some work here. There we go. Once you have your head all finished, I'm just going to take your thread, up to the eye, trim out any of the extra shag that the dubbing has. And then what we can do is whip finish. Then I'll trim out any of the excess fibers from this dubbing. I don't like it to be too shaggy. There we go. And that's all there is to a Egan's Headstand Carp fly. Pretty easy to tie, not too bad. This fly, since we tied the bead chain on top of the hook, it'll essentially ride like this. It'll ride hook up, head down. That's all there is to the Egan's Headstand.